Hello, my name is Doug Merck. I'm Nathan Merck's dad, and he had asked me to tell you something about my father, his grandfather, which he never knew. He died before he was born. But my dad's name was Joseph Hoyt Merck, and he grew up in Hall County, and he was very poor. He was poor. Now, for you city people, that's worse than being poor. Poor is real poor. And so his dad was a sharecropper part of the time. A sharecropper was somebody that worked on another man's farm. They didn't have enough money to own a farm, so they would work for a man on the farm for a percentage of the crops. That's how they made their living. And so he did that for many years. My dad said he also would cut cordwood. Cordwood is wood that they cut and sell. They used it on the trains and all that kind of stuff. So some people use it for firewood in their house, but he cut a lot of cordwood. And he said that one day he and his dad had been to town carrying a wagon pulled by the mules, and he had they were going home very late. And on the way home, it was dark as could be, and all of a sudden, out from the road a little ways was a lady in white, dressed in white, sitting out there, long white robe like. And my daddy said it scared him to death because he thought it was a ghost. But his daddy wasn't afraid of most anything, so he stopped and went out there, and it was a lady. It really was a lady, and she was sitting on a log, and she was about frozen. So my granddaddy, my daddy's daddy, got her up and put her in the wagon and wrapped her up with some blankets, took her to their house, and he and my grandmother got her up in the fireplace, and got her heated up and got her some coffee and all this stuff, put her to bed that night. The next day, some of the people came along looking for her. She had escaped from a mental institution. And if my granddaddy had been too scared to stop, help her, she probably would have frozen to death sitting out on that log. So he told me that many times. But my dad's dad died when my dad was in the 8th grade. So he had to quit school. He only told me one thing about school. He said one day a boy usually made 0 on everything. He just flunked everything. And for some reason, he made 100 on a test. So when the teacher handed out the papers, she said, "That's pretty good." He said, "Pretty good, blankety blank blank. 100's perfect." He wasn't going to let her get by and say the only 100 he had ever made was pretty good. But my dad said he started working, cutting cordwood. He had 3 sisters. He had 2 stepsisters and 2 half-sisters and a full-blooded sister. They all, when they got old enough, went to work to help out their mom, all the bills and everything she had. And so he worked at many different jobs, but he eventually became a carpenter. He was a very good carpenter, a skilled carpenter. Even though he quit school in the 8th grade, he was a self-educated man. He read books all the time. He loved to read books. He loved to study, and he had people that taught him, that he worked for. They taught him how to be a successful carpenter. He could cut a set of steps. He could cut the rafters for a building. He knew how to do all that stuff. We grew up working for him, but he never taught us how to do that. He just always did it himself. And we had a lot of fun growing up. But my dad was a hard worker. He would work on the job 5.5 days a week. And then when he came home from work, he worked on the farm till dark. We had 86 acres down in Hall County, down near Gillisville, Georgia. And we had 2 mules. The mules' names were Babe and Kate. And we plowed with those mules. We farmed all that with those mules. We grew almost everything we ate. We grew vegetables. We grew corn to make cornmeal. We grew peanuts to have something to snack on in the wintertime. We grew the beans and potatoes and most anything you can think of, we grew it. And my mom would can all summer and freeze stuff all summer, and we would have plenty to eat. We always had plenty to eat. It might not be exactly what you wanted on the table every day, but there was always plenty of it. We never had to worry about something to eat. my mom cooked 65 biscuits every morning. She had 2 pans that were 5 by 6 biscuits. I mean, big biscuits, cat head biscuits is what we call them. And she would cook 30 in each pan. Then she had a little round pan that she cooked 5 biscuits and a hoe cake. If you don't know what a hoe cake is, a hoe cake is all the dough that you had left over. You put it together and made a huge biscuit to go in the middle. And that was the best one. We fought over that all the time. I had 6 brothers and 2 sisters, so there were 9 people in the family, the children, and then my mom and dad, which made 11. And we lived near Gainesville until I was 4 years old. They lived on my aunt's property, and most of her property was taken up by Lake Lanier. So she sold the remaining part of it, and she moved into town in Gainesville. My dad bought that 86-acre farm down near Gildsville. And I remember moving day. I was only 4 years old, but I remember a lot about moving day. One of the things I really remember is we had a set of ducks that you pulled. A big duck and all these little ducks behind it, stuck together by strings. And you pull it, they had wheels that made the wings go around and around, and it made noise, quacking noise. And I loved that thing, but it got broken. It wasn't working as good as it used to. And I remember they burned it in a pile of trash. And I didn't like that at all, because I wanted to keep that duck, those ducks. Then I remember getting down to the house. It was an old house. Now remember, there was 11 of us, and that house had 1 bedroom. So this is how we slept. My mom and dad put up 3 double beds in that bedroom where 6 of the boys slept. There was an entranceway, or hallway we called it, big enough to put a double bed, and that's where my 2 sisters slept. Then in the living room, my mom and dad put their bed up, and a baby bed for my baby brother. And we lived in that house for about 3 years, because the plan all along was to build a new house. They built a new house. It took about 3 years to build it, because they built it in their spare time. And one of the things that was pretty interesting, we were getting everything moved and ready to go. And we had a corn crib with all this corn in it. So my dad sent my 2 older brothers out to the corn crib to load the corn on the wagon that was going to be pulled by the mules. And they were raking, and they saw a snake moving there. And they got down just a little bit of corn left in the corner, and they saw a snake. They went and got my dad. He came out there, and he took a hoe and started raking the corn back. He killed 2 copperheads that were in that corn. And then they put all that corn on the wagon, and they drove it from Gainesville down to Gildsville. Those 2 mules and a wagon with all that corn on it. And they got down there. And
how far is that?
That's about 11 miles. Took them just about all day long to get down there. And that was interesting. I didn't know that for a long time. One of my older brothers told me about doing that. When we got down there, I was on the last load that went down. They had hired a man with a big truck to haul all their furniture and everything down there. And I was on the last load going down. And I got down there, and it was late at night. And I remember I was only 4 years old, and I was so sleepy. And they never had put the beds up yet. Oh, I wanted to go to bed so bad. I was just dying to get to sleep. And finally, they got the beds put up, and we got to go to sleep. But it was very late. It was probably after midnight when that happened, because it had been a very busy day. And we grew up. We lived in the house 3 years. And I was telling somebody today, they were talking about old coins, and I said, we used to play toys underneath the old house, homemade toys, blocks of wood we used for cars, and vanilla wafer bottles we used for cars. And we found a lot of old coins, Indian head pennies and stuff like that. And we didn't know anything about old coins. We just took them to the grocery store and bought candy with them. So if we'd have kept those coins, they might have been worth something today. I'm sure they would have been worth something today. But we grew up on that farm. We plowed. Every year we killed a beef, killed a bull for beef, and we killed 2 hogs. We processed the hogs. And on hog killing day, I never liked that, because the house was filled. The cabinets were covered with meat. The table was covered with meat. You know, they had all that stuff going, and you had to grind all that sausage up. And my mom would can the sausage. She'd make sausage balls and put it in pint jars and then they poured the grease in there on top of it and sealed it and turned it upside down till it sealed real good. In that wintertime, it was so good. But the day she did that, she always baked some extra biscuits. And we would take that fresh sausage out of the pan, put it in a biscuit. Oh man, that was so good to eat that biscuit with sausage. I don't know, we'd almost make ourselves sick eating it. But, and the neighbors, you always shared. When you killed hogs, you always shared some with the neighbors. They'd send us kids out to the neighbors, have a mess of meat. And they do the same when they killed hogs. They shared with us. And it was just, we grew up in a wonderful community with great neighbors. I had a neighbor that lived next door to us named Cody Ash, and he was a second daddy to me. I loved Mr. Cody so much. He had a huge screen porch on the front of his house, and I'd go down there. It was real close to the road, in a curve, and they had many cars that wrecked right up against his porch because people would be driving too fast around that curve. But I'd go down and sit on that porch with him, and we never had Cokes. We couldn't afford them, but he always had Cokes. His wife would bring him and me a Coke out. We'd sit there and talk, and he'd tell all kinds of stories from the past when he was growing up, and we'd just enjoy that Coke so much. I thought they were wonderful. It was wonderful to have a Coke because we never had any. And he had apple trees. He had some June apples. Oh, they were so good. I couldn't wait for those June apples to get ripe. And then Mr. Ash, he would hire us to do some work for him. He had chicken houses, and back then they had half-gallon jugs that you screw these things on and turn them upside down and water the chickens. And you had to wash them, and he couldn't get his hands down in the jugs, so he'd hire us to wash some jugs. He'd hire us to help him hoe in the garden. We hated to hoe in the garden at our house, but doing it with him seemed like kind of like fun, and he paid us as well. We get 50 cents. We thought we were in heaven because you could go down to Hoyt Langford's store and buy Kit candy. If you don't know about Kit candy, you ask some of your grandparents about it. You'd get Kit candy. It was a pack of candy that had 4 pieces in it. You'd get 2 packs for a penny. You could take a quarter and get a whole brown bag full of Kit candy. And I think you can still buy them at some of the places like Dollywood, where they sell the old candies and all. Other places that sell old candies, they have them. And they were out of this world. We just loved them. But we loved to go down to the store if we got any money. And then sometimes, if we got a quarter, if we ever got a quarter, which wasn't very often, the bread man ran by our house going down to Hoyt Langford's store. Hoyt Langford was my wife's uncle. And they would go down there and take bread and everything. And we'd flag him down. He'd stop. He'd sell us a honey bun, big honey bun for a quarter. Oh man, we enjoyed that so much. And occasionally we'd buy a loaf of bread because we didn't have a loaf of bread in our house. We ate biscuits all the time. It was much cheaper. We bought flour. My dad bought flour about a 50-pound bag. And back then, the flour bags had print on it. My mom used to make our shirts and our sisters' dresses out of those flour sacks. They made beautiful dresses. When one came in, somebody claimed it. I claimed that one. Give me a shirt made out of, because we liked the color of it. But we had a wonderful time growing up. It was hard work. And I told you we killed a beef every year. And we didn't have a freezer. We had no way of keeping the meat. We put the meat from the hogs in the smokehouse and canned a lot of it and all that. But we didn't have any way of keeping the beef, so we went to Gainesville. My dad rented a freezer locker. They had a big room up there with all these freezer lockers in it, kind of like a freezer today. But they had keys, and you could go in and, open it up. Yours was secure. And my dad would put all that beef in there in that freezer locker. He paid them so much a month to use their freezer locker. And then we would go in there to get meat out for the weekend, and it would be so cold you would think you were going to freeze to death before you got out of there. But it was a lot of fun. We had a good time growing up. We always went to church. My dad was a church-going man. He was a deacon. He was a song leader. He led the singing for as long as he could until he got too old. He led the singing at our church. And we went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, every revival service, every vacation Bible school. Back then we took turns cleaning the church. We'd go for that. Cemetery, clean off the cemeteries. It didn't matter what they had at church, we were always there. My dad believed well to do our part. And we would help the neighbors. We hadn't lived in Gillsville very long till one of the neighbors in our church community got very sick. He had corn planted in all his fields, but he couldn't work it anymore. So all the men in the communities took their mules and horses over and plowed all his crops for him, laid it by. That means the last plowing you have to plow. They laid it by, and then when the corn grew and matured, they went in, gathered it, and put it in the crib for him. That's what people used to do for each other. And he eventually died. He never recovered from that sickness. But people in those days took care of each other, helped each other with everything that they could. So I didn't like all the work I had to do growing up. Plowing a mule all day is not a lot of fun, but we survived. And now I wouldn't take $1 million for it, for the experiences that we had growing up. We had to milk cows. We had 3 milk cows, and usually 2 of them were given milk, sometimes 3, depending on when they'd had their calves and all. And we'd milk cows until you get through milking, your fingers would just be together, and you'd have to take your other finger and straighten them out. And we'd always had cats, and the cat would come around while we were milking. We'd squirt milk over to the cat's mouth. The cat go, it was so funny to watch them. We always enjoyed doing that because they get it all over themselves. But they loved that milk, that good warm milk out of the cow. One day, one time in the winter in the 60s, I don't remember exactly what year, we had a freeze, and that freeze was lasted for days. And it would warm up just enough. There were about 6 or 8 inches of snow and ice on the ground, and it would warm up just enough in the daytime so when it froze back, it would be like a sheet of ice. I mean, so slick, you couldn't stand up on it. One day I'd been down to milk the cow, and I had a 2-gallon milk bucket, and I was being so careful walking back up to the house, I didn't want to spill it. My feet shot out from under me, and that milk came all over me. Felt pretty good at the time because it was warm, but then it didn't last but a couple of minutes, and you were cold with all that moisture. But we had a good time growing up. We heated our house with a wood heater, and our house wasn't insulated, so you had to stay in the living room. And everybody gathered around the heater. I mean, there were 11 people. You had to work and get you a spot around the heater. And then we cut all the firewood. My brother Johnny and I cut all the firewood with a cross-cut saw. My brother Vernon cut all the wood for the wood heater in the kitchen where my mom cooked for many years. But we did all the cutting with the cross-cut saw. And it was hard work, but we kept it done. And we had a place on the back side of the property that had some beautiful trees to cut with no limbs on them hardly. We loved to go there and cut. But if it was wet and my dad couldn't get down in there with his truck, we carried the wood by hand, probably 1/8 of a mile to our house. And you have to make several trips to get enough for the wood to last all night long. But it was tough. It was tough growing up. And most of the kids I went to school with didn't grow up like I did. Their dads worked at a mill or something like that, and they didn't grow up like I did. I've always enjoyed being around older people because they know about plowing a mule. They know about using a 13 Oliver turning plow, and the people I grew up with didn't know. They don't know anything about that. So I have always enjoyed being around older people and talking to them, listening to them. One time Mr. Cody Ash said, we were up in the mountains trout fishing, and we went by a little brick church, and he said, now when I was growing up, that's the church I went to, except it wasn't brick back then, it was just clapboard, white clapboard building. He said they had a preacher who was also a country doctor, and he could stir up a crowd so quick. And the first thing he started out with, he said, I just want the Lord to come back right now. And he'd get everybody hollering, they wanted the Lord to come back and everything. So these 2 boys got up in the attic of the church with a small drum. And the next Sunday, they got to shouting and hooping, wanting the Lord to come back. They said when those boys hit that drum one time, it was deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop. When they hit it the second time, everybody was headed for the door. And the preacher was up at the front, and the only door was back at the back. And he got to cussing the church because they only had one door. He said, those boys got in trouble. I said, the preacher should have got in trouble. He should have been the one that got in trouble. He's cussing the church. But we had a good life. We didn't have a lot of things, but we had plenty of food and had a good family and a lot of good friends.